Alright, so continuing our commentary about the rules change. So, last thing we talked about was exile. I'm going to talk about the beginning of the end step. Let's see. So, I always see, even I've been playing Magic for a long time, and I always even found this confusing. Triggers at end of turn, lasts until end of turn. Um, at the beginning of end of turn, etc. So they're changing the wording on cards to say the beginning of the end step. So there's the anything that said at end of turn only triggered at the beginning of the end of the turn. So, like if you had an ability that said, create X, tokens and sacrifice them at end of turn, you could do it during the end of turn, and they would last until the end of the next turn. So you could use them at the end of your opponent. Use your ability during the end of your opponent's turn, and then use them on your turn. So something like the I forget what he's called. There's a black creature with a red ability that on Moto is reprinted. That could return creatures from graveyard and makes 3/1 haste creatures. So he's really good because you can do that. Anyway, so they're changing. Let's see. End of turn step and the end step and changes ability cards. Okay, so it doesn't sound like anything really changes. It's just a little more clear in the wording. So cards will say at the beginning of the end step or until end of turn, right? Okay, yeah. So nothing is functionally changing. It's just terminology. They're just trying to make the legalese a little clearer, which is good because this particular region of Magic was really annoying. Okay, so yeah, they use the example of Rakdos Guild Mage, who can, for 4 mana, you can put a 2/1 red goblin creature token with haste into play, and you remove it from game at end of turn. So you can activate it at the end of your opponent's turn, and then activate, and then the token will last during your next turn in order to attack. Okay, so now the new wording would be put a 2/1 red goblin creature token with haste into play, remove it from the game at the beginning of the next end step. So that's fine. Of course, with the exile terminology, they did 2 iterations here just to be extraneous, I guess. Put a 2/1 red goblin creature token with haste onto the battlefield, exiled at the beginning of the next end step. So, okay. Mana pools and mana burn. This is one of the larger effects that can cause some interesting card interactions. Mana pools or mana burn is if you have any extra mana that you can't use at the end of a phase, you burn for it. So at the end of the combat phase, the end of the main phase, the end of the upkeep, or one of those phases, you would take 1 damage for each mana you had left over. So they're changing that so there's no more mana burn. They're just getting rid of that entirely. I think the mana pools are emptying. Okay. Okay, so mana pool's now empty at the end of each step and phase. So before, I guess things like upkeep might have been a step in the draw step, but not the draw phase. So that was a little confusing, steps versus phases. So that's what they're saying. Mana can no longer be floated from the upkeep to the draw step, nor the declare attacker step to the declare blocker step of combat. So that'll have a few minor consequences. Every once in a while, you have somebody who can produce mana and maybe your opponent decides to kill it during the attack step, and you float it because you want to cast something at the after damage is on the stack or whatever. So, not that any of that's really applicable anymore. So that's gone, which is fine. It's less complicated. More universal rules are good. So mana burn, it didn't come into play too much. It makes Braid of Fire really good because you don't have to worry about burning for it anymore. It was a colorless and red enchantment, cumulative upkeep, add 1 red mana to your mana pool. So for a 2-mana enchantment, that card's insane now. I wouldn't be surprised if that found a home in some extended decks now. Be a great control card if you have somewhere to put that mana. Eventually just cast your Bogard and Hellkite or whatever during the upkeep. Okay, so token ownership got a change. So the current token ownership rule. Okay, so all right, so yeah. So the way the tokens used to work, which I've never come across this rule, but I guess in 10 years of playing Magic, or more like 7, 6, if you eliminate the lag period. So the way tokens used to work, I guess, is that if you control the effect that created a token, no matter whose control it came into play under, you own that token, even though you don't control that token. Kind of like, remove from the game target card you own, right? So you can, even if your opponent gains control of it, you can get rid of it because it's your card, right? So you own it. And that's what owning means. It doesn't mean controlling. So before, you'd be able to use something like Hunted Dragon, which has the drawback that when it comes into play, it puts 3 2/2 first strike soldiers in play under your opponent's control. And then you could use something like Brand to gain control of them all. Right? So now, which make more sense, is the player who they originally came into play under, they own the token, so you can no longer do that. So that's fine. A little bit of a difference makes reasonable sense, I guess. Although you could argue it either way. Either way, like I said, I've never come across a rule, so it's a pretty marginal change to the game. Okay, comp damage. No longer using the stack. This is the biggie that has caused the most controversy, and certainly it should, because it's the most the one that affects the game the most. So what you have been able to do since I've been playing Magic, for like 10 years, is you assigned damage, and then damage went on the stack. Then if the creature that assigned damage left play, the damage would still be dealt. What they wanted to do is prevent that, because it just doesn't make much sense. And there's a lot of cards that have an advantage because of it, because they have a sacrifice effect or whatever. So you block, you put damage on the stack, you sack your guys. These are some of my favorite effects. Things like Thopter Foundry are going to get a lot worse. Nantuko Husk, Mog Fanatic, Sakura Tribe Elder. These are some of the notable examples people have mentioned. Siege Gang Commander. Okay, so instead now, what happens is you begin your combat set and you declare attackers as normal. Your opponent chooses however many creatures they're going to block with, same as before. The only difference now is you choose an order of the blockers, the attacking player does. So if you block my guy with 2 guys, I choose that this is guy 1, that's guy 2. So that's blocker number 1, that's blocker number 2. And my guy that's being blocked has to deal damage first lethally to the first guy, and then lethally to the second guy, and then if there's more, etc., etc. So it's like trampling through the various creatures. If creature is removed before damage is dealt, it does not do damage. There's no damage assignment. So this makes like pump effects much worse, right? So before, like a quarter of the time or 30% of the time or even more, maybe it was like half and half, I don't know, it's a lot, in limited, you'd put damage on stack, and then you would pump your guy with like a giant growth effect, +3/+3 or whatever, and then he wouldn't die. And if your opponent then wanted to kill your guy, they'd have to use a removal spell on your guy,